G'day, it's Geoff here from Seriously Series. Today I'm going to be doing a video on this. Yes, it's a fuel pump. I'm going to be showing you how a mechanical fuel pump functions and works, and some of the things that you need to look at when rebuilding your fuel pump. Also, some of the pros and cons of buying a brand new fuel pump over the old tried and tested fuel pump that came with your motor. Now these are all important things, as any motor needs fuel, spark and air in order to complete the 4-stroke cycle, or 2-stroke cycle in that matter. So we're going to be looking at that in greater detail today. So I'm going to take you off the tripod and, as always, get you right in there and show you exactly what's going on.
Okay, so this is a mechanical fuel pump. Now, obviously we're going to be talking about this mechanical fuel pump in relation to the 2¼ litre petrol engine. So this is a 4-cylinder Rover built motor. Now, many of you are probably thinking, oh, it's a Rover motor, it's got a Rover fuel pump, I'm going to scroll down the menu and click on something else where it's pertaining to my vehicle. But don't do that. What goes on inside this mechanical fuel pump is exactly the same in principle what happens in every other mechanical fuel pump on any other vehicle. So keep watching this video. We're going to be going into great detail into how it actually functions and how to diagnose too when your fuel pump is about to give up the ghost, and when you need to look at overhauling it. So we're just going to go through the parts of the fuel pump on the outside, and then I'll pull it apart and we'll look at the internals. So one of the things I like particularly about these fuel pumps on the Rover motors, and it's the same on many other motors, is we've got this lever here. Now this is to actually help prime the fuel lines. So if I pump this, you can hear a squeaking noise. So by doing that, what I'm doing is I'm actually able to pump fuel up to the carburetor, and I'm able to suck it from the motor, filling up the fuel pump and pumping it to the carburetor. So it's a real handy feature. If you don't have this lever, what you end up doing is sitting there and cranking your starter motor before it actually fires. Now, a trick. I'm going to be telling you a few tricks in this video, so you've got to try and keep up. If your vehicle has been sitting for a long period of time, don't hop in, flick the key and just sit there turning the starter motor over. That's how you burn out your starter motor. Pop the bonnet, get underneath and start pumping using your lever. Once the lever becomes easy, there's no resistance left, then the pressure is built up. Hop in the car, crank it twice, 1, 2, leave it, crank it again and it will start up. Why does it take 2 times? Because that means the piston has done 1 full rotation and up again and is ready to have the spark plug to ignite, and then it will start. So whether you crank it, whatever you do, it always takes at least 1 or 2 clicks of the key before your vehicle will start. So we've got the actual lift handle here, or the prime handle. Then we've got this big coat hook thing. Looks a little bit something like what Freddy Cougar would have. So this is the flange here. And on the Rover motor, this is on the right hand side. Now, depending on what vehicle you've got and how it operates internally, this may change, but on most motors it is usually on the right hand side of the motor, and this is looking towards the front of the car. So this bolts onto the side of the motor. In here, on the edge of this tip, is a thing called a cam. Now what's a cam? This is it's not a round circle, it's like an ellipsoid shape or a teardrop shape. So this means that it only actually causes this lever to move in every couple of rotations or so. So it's not pumping all the time. If it did that, then we'd end up burning out the pump and we'd get too much fuel to the actual carburetor and it would become flooded. So the engineers have calculated that with the cam it will pump just enough to go into the carburetor without it actually flooding it. So that's very important. Okay, if you're converting a car from, and I've done this in the past, if you've got a motor that was fuel injected and you're then putting a carburetor derived inlet manifold on, you will need to change the cam, put a cam inside the block, as they do take them out. Right, moving to the side of it. What's this glass bowl here? This is called a sedimentation bowl. So this here is the outlet that goes from the tank. The fuel comes in. All the dirt, grime, dust, rust sinks to the bottom because it's heavier than fuel. Any water, because water is denser than fuel, will also sit on the bottom and the fuel will sit on the top. I think I've got that right. If I've got it wrong, please leave a comment below. I stand corrected. Now the fantastic thing about this is the only filter on the whole motor. Depending on what carburetor, yes, there's usually a filter in there too, but particularly on the Series 3 with the Zenith carburetor, there is no other filter. This is the only one. So you need to take this off regularly. If I'm doing a outback trip or going out to the back and beyond, I usually take this off every evening. And it's just enough fuel in here to actually light a fire. And I've covered that in another video, easy way to light a fire using a Land Rover, which you can check out at another date and time. But anyway, all the sediment and the water sits down the bottom here. Up the top here is gorse, and this is a really fine steel mesh. And I'll take this bowl off and we'll have a quick look at that. Okay, so I've taken the sedimentation bowl off. Ugh. Pretty dirty, pretty yucky, so we'll have to fix that up. And you can see actually in the bottom there, that's actually, I'll just get you over in the light a bit better. You can just see that's a bit of grime, looks like a bit of oil, bit of dust, bit of rust, who knows, but either way it's not good, so we need to get that out of it because that'll get sucked up into the carburetor. That's the clamp. So these clip onto the top of it here, there and there. And this brass bit here locates itself just in here. Now on the Series 2 fuel pumps, this O-ring or seal here is actually cork. On the Series 3 they opted for rubber. I prefer the cork. I think cork's much better. It's much more forgiving. Rubber, once this starts getting a little bit loose, it just ends up not sealing properly and you get air in the fuel, in your fuel, and that causes a huge amount of havoc. This nice clean goldy mesh thing in here is your gorse, and I'll get you right in there just to give you a close-up view. Camera's not quite good enough, but you can just see that it's a real fine mesh. So the fuel comes up into the bowl and then it's sucked up through here and then goes into the fuel pump over here and bang, as I explained before, up into the carburetor. So now what we're going to do is we're going to inspect this fuel pump, and I'll take it apart and we'll have a look at the diaphragm, because that tends to be the first thing that goes. Now one more thing before I move on to that is I wanted to discuss, as I mentioned earlier, about the older fuel pumps and the new fuel pumps that you can buy now. One reason that I have now become not a great fan of the new fuel pumps is this gorse here is plastic and it doesn't work properly. It actually falls off. It's not actually the right diameter and it's just hopeless. The petrol actually starts corroding it and breaking it down, and it doesn't sit flat. The other thing is too that these sediment bowls, see that's nice and flat on the bottom. Some of the new fuel pumps are actually on a 45-degree angle, which doesn't sound like a big deal, but if you're hitting really hard corrugations like we did on the Canning stock route, it actually moves around and starts popping out, and it doesn't create a nice seal on here. So yeah, I think it's best to rebuild your old fuel pump if you can and if you want to, but as I've made very clear in other videos, it all depends on what you're planning on doing with your series Land Rover. Okay, so that's enough of that. Now what we're going to do is we're going to crack this apart. So I need a small flat-bladed screwdriver, and I need to just slowly take these off one by one. One thing I forgot to mention earlier is when you do come to actually taking the fuel pump apart, you need to put it on exactly the same way as you took it off. So this is where you use a file, and you don't go crazy with it, you just be very careful, and you just put a little file mark just across there. So then you know exactly which way the top should go on with relation to the bottom of the fuel pump. So that's a good little trick to do. So keep that in mind when you do it. Otherwise you can use a permanent marker, but I find permanent markers tend to rub off after a while, so I like to do the old school file trick. Anyway, I'll take it apart. Okay, so we've pulled the fuel pump apart. This is the top of the fuel pump, as you'd remember this. So that was basically sitting on there like that. So I've taken the screws out, which are there, and now I've taken that out. Now you want to make sure you keep this nice and clean. You don't want any dust or grit getting into it. But now I'm going to show you how the fuel pump works. So here is the diaphragm. This is made out of rubber. Obviously we've got this large brass disc here, and if I push on the lever upwards like this, there you go, you can see it compress, release, contract, release, compress, release, and that's how it works. So that the cam here spins round, pushes this lever in, and if I'm very good one-handed, I can actually, there you go, and that's how it works. So it sits on the side of the motor and goes boom, 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 and that pumps the fuel up through, just wait, let me coordinate myself, yeah, up through this little valve here, and that goes up to the motor. So there are your two valves there. So if you get a replacement kit or overhaul kit, you'll get a new disc here, you get a new diaphragm here, and you get new valves. Now I've inspected the diaphragm seems fine. Why am I talking about the diaphragm? Well, obviously being rubber, this is the first thing that goes. You get tiny little holes in it, and that's just through sand and grit over the years. Also it goes a bit, perishes a bit, goes a bit hard, ends up cracking. So that's usually what happens, and you lose more and more fuel going to the engine, and therefore you have to work that car harder and harder and harder to get the fuel pump to try and work more and more and more through the valve. So you have to try and rev it more to get more fuel up there, and it's just not as efficient. So usually that's what goes first, but this one seems fine, and these valves seem okay in here. Looks like this has either been overhauled or is a relatively new fuel pump. So that is how a mechanical fuel pump works, 101. To fit and take off a fuel pump, I will try and cover that in a following video. As always, if you've enjoyed this video, if you found it of some use, please leave a comment below. If you want to see more videos like this, please subscribe, and I'll catch you later on. Okay, see ya.